Welcome to The Table, a podcast where we share real stories, struggles, and victories as we walk together in faith. We're back together after a couple heavy weeks, and this time we're diving into Colossians chapter 3. You'll probably recognize some familiar verses tucked into this chapter, like set your mind on things above, and whatever you do, do it all for the Lord. These aren't just great memory verses, they're practical, everyday encouragement for how to truly live out our faith. Paul challenges us to go deeper, not just to live in a way that looks good on the outside, but to let Christ transform us from the inside out. Our thoughts, our motive, our heart, all of it should reflect Him. If we say we belong to Jesus, our lives should be producing fruit that shows it. And here's what's really challenged me this week. Any sin we allow to remain in our heart is just taking up space that belongs to Jesus. That's really made me stop and think, where in my heart do I need to clear things out? Are there thoughts, habits, or actions that aren't glorifying God? Because even the small things can slowly keep us from being able to share His love with those around us. Hey, Jenna.
Hi.
Here we are back again recording podcast.
Yes.
If everyone only knew how difficult it was for us to find this time with life itself, but also, like many of our listeners know, you guys have had some pretty significant life things happening over the last 2 weeks
hmm
now. So, do you want to give an update? Do you want to share anything? I mean, I know I could share your story, and people are asking and messaging and praying, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity to share as well. Tell us how are you?
It's been a long 2 weeks. I'm thankful to say that my husband is okay. Um, I got a
That's
call
fun.
last Monday. Yeah, he's good. Got a call from him last Monday as he was in the ER. He had gone into work like he normally does. He is a prison minister. He had gone and was standing in line for checkpoint in the prison. He was going to go and preach that day, and he said that he just got nauseous. Then his head started hurting, and then the back of his neck was throbbing. And so he stood in line a little bit longer and realized he couldn't make it in and that he wasn't going to make it to preach. And he kind of stepped out of line to put his shoes on and realized, I got to get somewhere. And thankfully, the chaplain that he works with and a nurse were also in line with him and instructed him, hey, let's get you somewhere. But he drove himself to the ER. The Lord was gracious in getting him there and protecting him because once he got to the ER, they did quick scans and quickly got him some medicine to help with his blood pressure because it was through the roof. And at the time, they thought he had had a brain aneurysm. And at that point is when he called me. Sorry. Um, I had just gotten up with the kids and I was able to speak with him, and that was pretty hard, but I knew that he was okay and that he was clear. He was explaining all these things to me. Um, but hearing the word brain aneurysm is not very exciting. And I guess all the emotion hit, and I knew that I had to tell my kids. I knew that I had to get someone here to watch them, and I had to get to him. But the neurologist assured me that he was doing well and that he was at a place where they could transfer him. So he went by ambulance to a new hospital, a bigger, better hospital that was able to treat him in a neuro ICU. Um, we were told that Monday when it happened 2 weeks ago that we would be in the hospital for 2 weeks. And so that came as quite a surprise, but we learned through many, many imaging and tests. And he had an angiogram, which is where they just go into the brain to check the vessels, that there was no aneurysm and there were no malformations, that he had just had a subarachnoid hemorrhage, which is essentially a brain bleed, and that it would take time to heal. The pain management, the blood pressure management, all of those things have been incredibly difficult at home. So we've been to the ER twice since getting released in 4 days. And it's just a process now. He has restrictions, obviously. This somewhat puts you at a risk for other things. So we're having to take things slow. He's not working right now. He's not supposed to lift, bend over, um, drive. So all the things that he normally does, he's really not able to do. We go back in 2 weeks to visit both a neurologist and a neurosurgeon that did the angiogram and released him from the hospital. But it's definitely been a change for someone who is so active. He is super active, and this has really slowed us down. I'm thankful to be slowed down by the Lord. I'm thankful that He's doing as well as He is, and we know that's because people were praying for us and carried us through this. I've not had to make a meal at all, not once, and I'm thankful for what the Lord is doing, despite what it looks like to me, because it's hard and it's heavy. But I'm grateful that He is carrying us and He's sustaining us. And this all happened on Brian's actual like salvation date. He was saved 22 years ago on the day that this happened. And over in my mind, as he told every nurse, every doctor, every visitor that came in about, this is my spiritual birthday. He testified of the Lord the entire time, um, and the Lord saved him again on that same day. And so it's been very special, just to see what the Lord has done. I think Brian could write a book on how intimate and caring the Lord has been to us through this. And this was a very long update, but that's where we stand as of right now. Just very grateful and humbled. And I can't thank you all enough for your prayers and your care for us.
Thanks for sharing that, Jenna, because I know that people they want to know they love you and care about you, but also there's some real ways that people can be praying for you. And so thank you for sharing. I don't think that was too long. I think that was totally appropriate update for everyone listening and just to kind of give the context to what's been happening in your life. And I am so grateful that you found time to record a podcast with me on the list of priorities. This is very low, but I'm glad that you're here. I'm excited to have this conversation as we jump back into Colossians. And
Hmm.
we're going to talk about chapter 3. And this is Paul's letter to the Colossians. He's writing this from prison. I am coming to correct myself because I learned yesterday that Paul was writing this like 20 to 30 years after Jesus died on the cross. So, not a whole long time after that. And it was very fresh. It still would have been really fresh for all
Yeah,
of the people around. So I thought that was interesting yesterday, learning about that on Easter too. So
neat.
let's jump in to chapter 3. And I loved this chapter
Hmm.
because I think there are so many quotes from Paul in this chapter that we have on pillows or like framed on our living room walls or on a t-shirt. And so it's fun to get to see that in context after
It
we've spent
is.
all this time listening to him talk to the Colossians.
Hmm.
Uh, we're not going to read it all, but the first thing I think that jumped out, well, there's lots of things. The first thing I'm choosing to talk about is the verse 2, which is really, really common. Set your mind on things above. And I think probably your testimony and Brian's testimony over the last couple of weeks really speaks to this, right? Set your mind on things above, not on the things that are on earth. And I loved that encouragement from Paul, and he even goes into the next verse to say your life is hidden with Christ in God. Like you are set your mind on things above. You are cared for. You are okay. You are sealed. You are perfect and complete, like we've said over and over um, before as we talk about this. tell me what are your first, where did you want to start? Where's your first thought?
Well, obviously, verse 2 does stand out, but if you don't look at verse 1, like there's a point in verse 1 that helps you get to verse 2 because it says, if then you have been raised with Christ. It's hard to be raised with Christ if you don't know him. And you can't be. You're not going to live a life filled with Christ if you don't know him. And so Paul is saying, since you've been raised with Christ, and that to me is just a reminder that we enter spiritually into his death and resurrection at the point of our salvation. There's no other point in which we can be connected and raised, so to speak, with Christ if we're not saved. And I've been like it takes me back to Galatians 2:20 where I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who lives, but Christ who lives in me. And because of that, Paul is telling you to seek the things that are heavenly, that are above, where Christ is. Like that's almost like he's giving you a compass and reminding you that he is where you should be looking towards. Even though you're here on earth, your mind is supposed to be set above, on things above, not the things that are here on earth. Because here is temporary, there is eternal. And that's how we're able to set our mind on things above, is being connected spiritually with Christ through salvation.
I think that's a great point. And one of the commentaries that I read had this quote, and I thought this was so good. He said, "To seek heavenly things is to set our affections upon them, to love them and let our desires be towards them alone." And
Right.
that's like a big charge
Yeah.
to those who are saved, who are living this life with Christ, for all of your desires to be set on the things of Him.
Because we live on earth, we're human, and our lives are, I mean, we do human things. And it says you have died, your life is hidden with Christ. But you outwardly can't see what has happened inwardly when you're saved. That is an inward thing that happens between you and the Lord. And it says in verse 4, when Christ, who is your life, or who gives me life, appears, then you will also appear with him in glory. So he's saying, if your mind is set above and on the things of heaven while you're on earth, your life will not, like, people will see it. It will become an outward expression of you. It will be your continuous action to keep seeking him, and you'll be preoccupied with heaven rather than be ruled by earthly responses. And I love that quote that I read, just to be preoccupied with heavenly things so that it rules over your earthly or human responses.
Yeah, and Paul really then unpacks what that means, because the
Yes,
next several verses he is telling them like what to put away from them. He uses even stronger language, saying put to death these
put it
specific
off.
things,
Hmm.
and then what to put on instead. And so you're right, that change happens in within us, but there's fruit. We've talked about fruit over and over, but there are all of these characteristics that you should see in someone who is saved. There are, and he starts with telling them what to put aside,
Right.
and it's a nice list. And
Yeah.
some of these things are things that I only know, that I know about myself, because I know
Right.
everything there is to know about me. But some of these things are things that people could look at my life and see as well. And
Right.
so I think it's important that we pay attention to both.
Right. Get rid of them. Eliminate everything in your life that is contrary to godliness. And I don't know about you, but that's sometimes hard for me.
Yeah, and all of these things that he's mentioning, they all prevent you or keep you from seeking things above.
Right.
So they're all in direct opposition to what we're called to and the way we're called to act.
Right.
And you made a really great point. Some of these, the first couple are like the lust of the flesh. So passion and evil desire and sexual immorality, all of those kind of things. But he follows that up with covetousness and idolatry. And I don't have like tiny idols in my home that I worship, but um, giving the love that the Lord deserves to literally anything other than Him is just that. It's
Right.
idolatry. And I'm guilty of that all the time. Because it's because of my sin.
Well, it's doing what we desire rather than what God desires. Like all of these things that are mentioned are literally things that we desire instead of what God would desire for us or in us. And and at first I was like, oh, these don't pertain to me, and until I kept reading through them. It's like you let greed is a part of everything in our lives. It's what we think we deserve, what we think we should get, what we desire all these different things, and it becomes greed. And I just, and he points it out, like that becomes an idol for you. You want comfort, so it becomes an idol for you. You want food, well, that becomes an idol for you. Like we think that these things don't pertain to us, but he's really hitting the nail on the head and hitting us all where it counts and reminding us that these things are, you're going to deal with them. You're human and you're going to deal with them. And he reminds us that the wrath of God is coming. And what that means is like God has to react to sin because he's holy. I like how Paul was making the point of putting them all away, taking them off, almost like taking off dirty clothes at the end of every day. You're going to have to do this daily. You're going to have to put aside these feelings that you have that are sinful, and they may just be small things, small sins that no one else sees. But Paul is reminding the Colossians and therefore us to take off those dirty clothes, put them aside, and make that a daily action to seek out and get rid of those sins daily. And then he talks about more that you've got to put away in verse 8 about anger, wrath, malice, slander, and obscene talk, which seems like I don't have this problem until you look up the definitions.
Hmm.
And then the definitions are like bitterness, sudden outbursts, are within our nature to do harm, to let foolish talk and obscene, nasty things come out of our mouth. And we may not see those things as being a big deal, but this has been one that Brian's been working with the boys because they're quick with the kids at school and on their teams, and with each other to just call each other names. And you think it's no big deal. But one brother said to another, he called his brother, you fool. And Brian brought out the verse in Matthew 5:22, where it talks about whoever says, you fool to another brother shall be guilty enough to go to hell. And like we're being warned of that. And same here. It's like Paul is telling you that people deserve our dignity and kind words. They don't deserve obscene slander, anger, bitterness. They don't deserve that because every person is made in the image of God. And our remarks as believers shouldn't be filled or laced with insults or disparaging speech to other people, even if we are angry with them, even if they have made us upset. We need to put off that old self and try to speak in love. And if we have an issue with them, speak to them in love and say, here's the conflict that I have. It's like he's telling them these are simple things that are happening that you've got to put away. And don't lie to each other. In verse 9, he even says, don't lie to each other. And you think back to Genesis where lies are, Genesis is filled with them lying about different things. and none of it worked out real well other than God worked through it and took care of those things. But you've got to put off your old self and its practices, and you have to put on your new self to conform to the image of our Creator. And Paul is reminding them of this over and over and over, that every careless word or deed or thought that we're speaking, Matthew 12:36 says that we're going to render account for it in the day of judgment. So every word that comes out of our mouth, we're going to take account for that. And so I want to be careful with all of these things, and I want to put the things that seem like no big deal are a big deal to the Lord, and I need to let go of them.
Yeah, and it reminds me of that Proverbs, out of the mouth the heart speaks. And
Uh-huh.
so whether you think that this is like your own hidden sin, it's gonna come out of your mouth eventually. And nothing is hidden. Like God will reveal all things. And so I think that's a great thought to just think about taking it off, like putting it away, putting it to death. And then he doesn't leave them there, which is exciting to me because
Yeah.
he tells them what to put on instead.
Right.
I want to read this verse. This is still Paul, but this is in Romans. Romans 6:12. Let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body, to make you obey its passions. Do not present your members to sin as instruments for unrighteousness, but present yourself to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God as instruments for righteousness. For sin will have no dominion over you, since you are not under the law, but under grace. And we've talked a lot about the law over the last several episodes, and it's this time of year just brings us back to the cross. And I just think we have a choice to not use our words, whatever instruments the Lord has given us for sin, but to use them for Him. So Paul leads us in verse 12. He then tells us, again, this is probably stitched on someone's couch pillow, all of these things to put on, right?
Right.
Compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, patience, forgiveness, all of these things that we can rattle off really quickly, but can be so difficult to do all of these things, and love others the way that we should really love them.
Yes. Yep. And also he points out being forgiving, being able to forgive one another, and he takes it back to the Lord. Like, as the Lord's forgiven you, you must forgive. It goes back to letting go of anger and putting off all those other things. It goes back to that because he knows Paul's human. He knows we're human. He knows the Colossians are human, and it's real easy to get angry with somebody. It's real easy to talk ill of someone. It but Christ in us allows us to forgive. We must forgive and move past these things and show compassion and kindness, to be gentle with people and patient, which is hard, and forbearing one another. Like he knows he's pointing all these out because that's how people will see Christ in us as God's chosen ones. Is these are the things that people need to see in us because it's then that they'll see Jesus in us. And isn't that our goal? Is that the world sees Jesus in me? Isn't the point that they see the light rather than the darkness? So I have to be different.
And he ties it up in verse 14. He says, above all else, and above all these, put on love. And it makes me think about what Jesus said, like, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then love your neighbor. It really is like the love that we should show other people is, you're exactly right. It's what points them back to Jesus. And Paul even says, love binds everything together in perfect harmony.
Hmm.
So if I love you the way I'm supposed to, then I'm probably going to be compassionate and kind and humble and patient and forgiving and all of those other things that also should be my character.
Well, and I think it's interesting that right before this in verse 11, he's talking about the Greek and the Jews, the circumcised and uncircumcised, the barbarians, the slaves, the free. And then he ends it right before telling us what to put on, that Christ is all and in all. Like Christ is what unites us all. There's no racial, religious, cultural, social barriers there because the gospel, the cross, his resurrection broke all that down. And there's so much hate and malice and anger and frustration in the world today because of that one. It's like we're overlooking that. Christ is what unites us all, is who unites us all. And we want to put up these barriers and these walls, and it leads us to going back to the things that we're supposed to be putting to death. And it should take us to the point of, above all that, putting on love. Like there should be no barriers because the gospel breaks them down. They're no longer there. And so he's encouraging us as God's chosen people to let the light shine from us in this dark, fallen world, and love is where it starts. It all goes back to love. Like you said, all those things will be they'll flow out of us if we start with Christ's love. And I just love how he points that out. And I love verse 15 too. I know you'll probably talk about it, but verse 15 too, just I love how he continues to encourage you of putting Christ first.
Yeah, and living in unity. He
Uh-huh.
also like he mentions again that they're all one body in Christ, and we
Right.
are. That's true of us today too.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's so much in verses 14 through 16, 17, truthful. Like the end of this gets quoted a lot because there's
Right.
so much wisdom in in these words of
Right.
Paul that I don't even know we could really talk about all of it. Um, I mean, there are three words. The next three words are "and be thankful," and I feel like you could have a whole podcast series on thankfulness and what it means to be thankful and what it looks like. Into verse 16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. That is hard to do if you don't know the word.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that he's just pointing back to that. But I love that phrase, dwell in you richly. Another version says, keep house in our hearts. Like let it
Mm-hmm.
settle in and
Right.
be what is in our hearts, the word of Christ and the scripture. And then he encourages them to all of these other things as well, teaching and admonishing, which is a word we don't use every day.
Right.
But it's really important to have that practice of admonishment in wisdom and then singing psalms and hymns and songs again with thankfulness in your hearts to God. I just rattled off a bunch of things. I know you have notes about those verses too. What stands out to you?
I like the leftas in verse both 15 and 16. In 15, he says, let the peace of Christ rule in your heart. And that pretty much, that peace can mean the peace of Christ right there can mean multiple things. Like when I think of peace, it means rest or being still. But it also can mean that you're in agreement with. You're in agreement. If I'm at peace, I'm in agreement. If we've made peace, we're in agreement together. So it's like he's telling you, be in agreement and have an attitude of rest with Christ and let that rule in your heart so that you're in one body and that you're in harmony. And then he says, be thankful. Like, be thankful that that's happening. And then another let that you just talked about, letting the word of Christ dwell in you richly. I like how that's another thing that brings you peace. You can't have peace without God and his word. And he brings it to you constantly. And so peace and gratitude, the peace of Christ ruling in your heart, being thankful, and that word of Christ, they're all kind of closely related. They're all linked. They all go hand in hand. If you're not reading the word, you're going to have a hard time being in agreement with the Lord and what he's doing. You're going to have a hard time having an attitude of rest and stillness. So I like how he combines them all just to point out how important each of those things and how closely connected that they are, and that one really works with the other. And then the teaching and admonishing, obviously, in all wisdom, and being together and learning from one another, worshiping together, where it's talking about singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in our hearts to God. It's like he's just really pointing out what the church should be doing together and how this is what's going to please the Lord, and how we become those lights in darkness is doing it together.
Oh, yes, I don't even know. Like, I don't even have a response to that, except to say that I think 17 rounds it out really nicely. And I try to use this a lot. I use this a lot in my parenting. I have to tell this to myself over and over again. And whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through Him. It's that attitude of whatever I'm gonna do,
Hmm.
all these things, whatever I'm gonna say, I should do it in the name of Jesus. I should have my mind set on things above so that my actions and my words follow that.
Well, and I'm not doing this for me. When I first read this verse, it reminded me of the verse, whatever you do, work heartily for the Lord, not for yourself or not for men. And
Mhm.
obviously, it's a few verses down. Like Paul says this in verse 23, which we're not covering today, but like that's it's like whatever you do, you're supposed to do it heartily, or in both your word and deed. So in both your speech and your actions should be done in the name of the Lord. And as a believer, if hatefulness, all those things he's told me to put off are what's coming out, that's what the non-believers are seeing of Christ in me, and that's not of Christ. And so he's reminding them, reminding me that whatever I do, whatever comes out of my mouth, whatever actions I do today, tomorrow, forever, they're not about me. They're not about getting fame. It's not about being lifted up. It's all for the Lord. And that should be my goal, is that my life is hidden and risen with Christ, and it should show, and it should be obvious of who I do these things for and why I do the things that I do. I love how he just whatever you do, you're doing it for the Lord. You're doing it in his name, and to be aware of what's coming out of your mouth and what actions I'm making. It needs to it needs to be a reminder to me that everything that I'm doing is in the name of the Lord.
Thanks for coming to the table. We hope today's conversation encouraged you as you seek Jesus in the big moments and the little ones. You'll find all the resources we mentioned today in the show notes. Feel free to share this episode, leave a comment, ask a question, or share your thoughts with us. Next week, on To the Table, we'll be wrapping up our study of Colossians. In this final stretch, Paul gives specific guidance for different relationships. Think husbands and wives, parents and kids. Then he closes the letter with personal encouragement and a list of shout outs to those who were a part of his life and his ministry. As I've studied this week, I found myself wondering, did Paul realize he was writing words that would be read for generations? Did he know that these names, these personal notes, would be preserved in the scriptures forever? As we come to the end of this letter, I'm grateful that his words have endured, whether he knew their lasting impact or not. I hope they've encouraged you just as they've encouraged me. Join us next week as we finish Colossians together. See you then.